Hello and welcome to the Singularity Syndicate podcast. I'm Naja Faysal. Today's conversation is with Dr. Annalisa Enrile, clinical professor at the University of Southern California, Suzanne Dworak-Peck School of Social Work, where we discuss the intersection of social work, human rights, and artificial intelligence. Dr. Enrile brings a wealth of experience in anti-trafficking efforts and the power of storytelling in community building. And now, here's Dr. Annalisa Enrile. Welcome to the program, Doctor.
Hi, thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
So I want to first talk about your resume. I mean, it's an impressive resume with a lot of achievements, and just having printed the highlights of your resume the other day, and it was pretty impressive. So I want the audience to have a kind of a sneak peek on your journey so far.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think that part of the reason is that I was really lucky in some respects to come to my work very early. I started working on the issue of trafficking even before we called it trafficking in 1994 when I was a undergraduate at UCLA. And it's just been part of my journey. I think as a young Filipino woman in the 90s, there was no way to ignore the growing literal sale of Filipino women, both in the Philippines and Southeast Asia and globally, in the United States. I just came from New York, where a couple of good friends of mine just released a play called Export Quality. And it was this really beautiful storytelling about the mail order bride industry, which still is not, covered under the kind of umbrella of human trafficking. So, we have quite a ways to go still.
Right, but what made you start that journey? Like, I mean, you are, let's say, did you grow up here in the U.S. and then chose social work as a major in university? Like, how did that happen?
Yeah, I mean, I was born here in the United States. My father was in the U.S. military. That's how he immigrated here, and was able to bring his family, my mother's family, etc., over. And I was kind of a little bit of a military brat, although I don't remember moving around so much. We eventually settled in California. And when I was in college, I realized there is this, I know it sounds so cliche, but there's this like whole world out there. And began to really learn a lot about, the Philippines. I had only ever gone, as a child and had those kinds of memories, but didn't really understand like the politics, the socioeconomics, etc. And when I was in college, went to a conference where there was a workshop on labor migration and trafficking. And actually, my first entree into trafficking was around labor exploitation and the export, processing zones and things that were happening in the Philippines and other parts of Asia. And just got interested there once I realized, it wasn't just women's labor, that, women's bodies were included in this. And, I remember being a student at UCLA and everything that meant, when you're 19 years old and kind of discovering the world. And seeing, on this bulletin board, an ad for sex tours to the Philippines. And that's really, where I got involved, and slowly seeing like the whole continuum of it, making it my kind of life's work. I would think I was like any immigrant kid. I want to be a lawyer or something like that. And, much to, not the dismay, but just the adjustment of my parents, having me come out an activist and an advocate, especially around gender violence, has been a journey, I think, for all of us.
That's really incredible. The reason why I say that is because to find a purpose at early age, at the age of 19 or 20, at the beginning of your journey, is I think a blessing, because I personally like struggled a lot in university to find my purpose. I started as a basketball player. I thought like basketball is going to be my career, and soon after I was like, okay, well, advertising is my career. But then every stage in life, when I dig deeper, I'm discovering like, oh, is it really what I want to do? Is it really the contribution I want to make to humanity? So I'm always reflecting, and it's kind of my purpose has always been evolving. And I think I would be like jealous of you that you found really your purpose from the get-go, and then you could dedicate your life's work into that thing. So tell me more about like finding the purpose. And was it always like you knew it, that this is going to be it, and you never questioned that are you on that path, or you need to change? Or
Um, Not to be too existential about it, but I do think that, um, uh, it changes everything. And so, I don't think that I could have done this work if it wasn't so dynamic, if there wasn't such a big need, if I didn't learn how to understand these types of issues in a really systemic kind of way. And so I've been able to really work in a lot of areas when it comes to human trafficking. Like I said, this continuum between labor exploitation and commercial sexual exploitation. I've been really lucky to be mentored in this space, both by strong activist women globally, but also by academics. I found myself in the area of social work in large part because, at the time that I decided to get my PhD, there was, one Filipino woman that was tenured in the United States, and that was Dr. Pauline Agbayani. And she said, come into social welfare. You could be anything you want. And I said, oh, that sounds great. Much like yourself, I think, even though I kind of had this, true north guiding me, I didn't know what that meant or what form that would take. And I've always kind of just been open to, following um, the kind of different ways that we fight this issue, which is, I think, how I end up here today with you talking about things like technology and artificial intelligence. I don't imagine that I would have been doing that 20 years ago.
yeah, absolutely. Life is very, very interesting. Um, but I'm just trying to really uncover if someone, like, let's say in your shoes, I'm trying to put myself in your shoes, discovering that, oh, there's a huge issue on sex trafficking when it comes to the Philippines. How do you start? Like, what do you do? Like, and tell me, what did you do?
I did what I would advise anyone to do, which is like to get in touch with the people that are already working, in the issue. Even if something seems brand new to us and it just seems like we're kind of waking up to it, it is with these wicked problems. There have been people that have been working on this forever. And so, to kind of get in touch and learn. I am not just because I'm an educator, but I really believe in lifelong learning, and I think that also keeps things fresh. Um, and to just see and be immersed in those communities, I would say like a lot of the beginning was just a lot of listening. That's why I believe so much in the power of story, as to really begin to understand like how I am connected to this issue. Again, all of the systems that are in play, and be able to work with people that are doing what it is you think you want to be doing, and finding your place in that, not rushing into something with thinking you have all the answers, because
Yeah,
you don't have to have them.
I'm assuming that you've done your undergrad and graduate research on that particular subject. So what did you discover? What can you tell us?
Well, I think one of the most important things is that we can't treat this like a simple topic. You know, Arundhati Roy says this really beautiful thing which I always remind my students of, which is let's not complicate things that are simple, and let's not simplify things that are complicated. And I think that oftentimes sex trafficking has become simplified as a matter of choice. You know, people don't do this unless they want to do this. I think people have tried to simplify it also as a matter of force, you know, and there's a lot of gray area between those two notions of choice and force. And I think that, you know, one of the biggest things that I've learned is that you have to understand the socio-political and economic relationships between countries and between stereotypes and why they exist. And there's a lot of layers. And I think that that has meant there's a lot of opportunities to do work in this space, and a lot of places to disrupt, you know, this really horrific issue. And I think that the biggest thing that I discovered is that it's a really complicated issue, and it, you know, is very difficult to simplify into numbers. I mean, I actually this year have started to stop speaking in numbers because I think people get caught up with numbers. And, you know, and although that it's important to understand the scope, I think it's really more important to understand like that this is happening out there and that it's, you know, more complicated than somebody's choice or somebody being forced into it. And that within like kind of this space of complications, we can find also opportunities of where we can help disrupt what is happening.
Can you share one story? Because I know you're big on storytelling, right?
Yeah.
So tell us about a story that really stuck with you, that makes you feel that, damn, this is a great mission that I'm on.
I mean, I think that I don't know that I feel like it's a great mission. I feel like it is very needed. Um, I don't necessarily feel like I'm in any position, you know, to be better at it than other folks. But it certainly is something that keeps me up at night. You know, this idea that all around the world people are selling girls. But you know, a few years ago, I was able to work with a great team of women. We wrote a book together, in fact, called Ending Human Trafficking. And part of that was doing research all over the world. And I remember in one area, we were in Thailand near Chiang Mai at this place called Chai Lai Orchid. And it was a place where they had set up kind of a job training, you know, workforce development, what we would call here in the United States. But really, it was this kind of very safe space for girls who are in danger of being trafficked from the, you know, hillside tribes to come and learn, you know, a craft and learn how to, you know, work in this hotel in, you know, different areas. And there was this little girl that I was interviewing, and she was telling me how bad it was for refugees that were in the area, and that if they left the refugee camp, of which there was very little food, no jobs, I mean, it's horrific, they would be, you know, considered gone and disappeared, and nobody would look for them. But if a tourist like lost their dog in Thailand, there would be like an all points bulletin for like this lost dog. And I just remember this 12-year-old girl telling me, you know, we are not animals, and we we have the right to be free. And you know, and just talking to me about, you know, how scary it was to be a girl in this world that was so uncertain. And at the end, you know, I asked her, like, is there something that I could, if I could do something for you, what would you want me to do for you? And, you know, remember, she's 12. So oftentimes children want a toy, or they want to watch something or their favorite food. And, she looked at me with very not 12-year-old eyes and she said, I just want you to tell my story when people ask you about the work that you do. Um, and so, to make sure it happens, I mean, we're confined by the screen, but I have this tattoo on my foot that is that phrase, we have the right to be free, just so people ask me about it. And, to be able to tell her story. And,
That's
now
incredible.
she's a writer, and is
And
writing
now
her own
you
stories.
are fulfilling that mission, or that you're fulfilling that request. So
Yes,
I
I hope
really
so.
appreciate you, and thank you for sharing that. And it's really, really touching. People who listen to my podcast know that I talk about a lot of technology and transformative technology that have implications on our society. And last year, basically, in similar times, ChatGPT was unleashed to the world, and since then, the buzz of AI haven't stopped, and it's really overwhelming of how much discussions and talks and how much this technology really has impacted and will
Mhm.
have potentially more impact in the future. So tell me the time that you first stumbled on ChatGPT, just a personal experience. When you start talking to that chatbot, what did you feel, and were you impressed at all?
Well, I mean, I think that my interaction with that kind of technology, specifically if you're talking about ChatGPT, has been really looking at it in terms of two things: communication and also, um, what does this mean for academia, right? I'm a professor, and it's like I could just like horrifically see all these students writing their papers, by using ChatGPT. I think after the initial hoopla died down, I wasn't so scared about the idea that people, that my students would use this as a way to, write their papers, etc. I am in a field where we are very driven by and guided by a code of ethics. And also, I think that, if you really read ChatGPT, like for something like creating a paper, you'd see that it's just kind of upcycling, information over and over. So, I always tell my students, you're working really hard for that fail. Uh, and so a lot of my students who are very earnest, and, the thing about social work is it's very quick. It's 2 years of study, and then you're out in the field. And in fact, many students are out, doing a practicum even before, they're working as a professional social worker. And so I think that that kind of level of commitment and responsibility to communities and families and individuals is something that is taken very seriously. I, I think in the world of trafficking, it's a little bit different where we are looking at, how do people use communication? And this is, where I have been really lucky to work with folks that are interested in harnessing this type of technology and trying to disrupt, that kind of chain of events that leads, to commercial sexual exploitation. And so it's been really interesting to see, like, how would you use something? We didn't necessarily use Chat GPT, but, how would you use this type of bot technology to, circumvent trafficking?
I feel a lot of people confuse AI with ChatGPT, and AI has diverse applications because this is a general technology. It has multi-purpose. I'm always curious to see use cases, like how are people using it, and how do you foresee also people in who have a limited access to higher education and critical thinking and professional writing skills. Like, let's say people in the Philippines, these young women that you care about in the Philippines, like how would you see them using technologies like that to elevate their standard of living, or to achieve more, or to learn more? Like, how do you see that impacting them?
Well, I mean, I think there's certain promise, in these types of technologies, in terms of, providing information around form and content. So, if you don't have access maybe to areas of higher education or even technical types of education where you maybe need to fill out an application or write a letter, um, then I think that ChatGPT is an amazing tool. That it really is helpful, to get the wording right, get the English right, even, if you are writing to kind of officials, or, need to create an inquiry about something. And in those cases, I think that, it is a tool that is really kind of democratizing spaces, where you don't have to have 4 years of higher education to know how to write a proper form letter. Um, and so, I mean, I think in those spaces, I think it is helpful, even in trying to find out, like, maybe things like what is the proper chain of command in certain places. And so, yeah, it's interesting to me too to see how that's utilized. I think in terms of access, like another level of access would be, how are, folks that are trying to harness technology for good or for social change, how are they able to use that technology, and that's another, I think, access point, because as you and I both know, it's very expensive to code a lot of these pieces, even before you get to the AI, like even for some machine learning, or even something with big data involved, that's not even getting to the AI part yet. But really also trying to stay, a step ahead of people that would use this type of technology to be exploitative.
And speaking of step ahead, it's really rare to see a professor of social work venturing into software. So tell me more about that. How did you get into that level of complexity?
Yeah, well, it is not by myself, by all means. I do have to say, at USC, and at the Suzanne Dworak-Peck School of Social Work, we are very forward thinking. And I think a lot of schools will say that they're innovative and that they're design focused, but I have to say, we started about 7 or 8 years ago, where a colleague of mine, Dr. Renee Smith-Maddox, and I realized that social workers and other human service providers were not at the table, and that we needed to be there when a lot of, Silicon Valley technocrats were creating amazing things, but not ever speaking to the communities that it would impact. And so, we started doing work around how do we harness technology for unaccompanied minors, this surge of minors that were, crossing the borders, for a better life. And now we are looking at, how do we harness technology to stop sex trafficking? And a couple of years ago, we looked at this phenomenon of athletics and trafficking, and that anywhere in the world where you had this huge athletic event, you would also have a big jump in the numbers of folks that were trafficked. And we talked to a lot of law enforcement to find out how they dealt with it. And I just so happened to, be working with a couple of folks in technology who said, what if we could stop it? Like, and I said, like, what if we could stop sex trafficking? They said, no, 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 no. What if we could just disrupt it, but in a scale where, if the way that the trafficking is happening is mainly through websites and the internet, and the use of mobile devices like telephones, what if we could basically block, that, communication between the people that are, selling this type of exploited sex on websites and the people that are trying to buy it? What if you couldn't get your foot in the door, so to speak? And I was like, how does that work? you know? And we talked to a lot of survivors. We talked to a lot of sex trafficking advocates and activists who basically said, yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, it is this simple exchange of calling up a phone number. And of the other side, pimps and traffickers picking up, or how whatever mechanism they have, and then setting up, the transaction. A lot of times, even law enforcement will set up stings using this mechanism, and then we'll end up arresting, right, people on the other side, these potential buyers. And so, we worked with survivors to get the wording right, to we don't have like the access to data that Chat GPT has, but we do, have access to these communities of survivors who told us these are the phrases that buyers use. These are the emojis that they are using, and the symbols, and the slang. And we're able to craft, different messages to make it seem like, these were potential buyers, and then to target, all of these different websites and send, overwhelm the system with messages. So it's difficult to tell what's real and what's not real.
It's a trap slash. You used also the cybersecurity tactics of hacking kind of thing when you send a barrage of data onto this website and they got overwhelmed and shut down, something like that.
I mean, well, they're, not it's not hacking. It is not, creating, this kind of illegal technology. We had to make very sure of that. We were answering ads. So we were answering solicitations that were put out there in the public. We were just doing it in a way that answered the ad 100-fold.
That is smart.
Yeah. Yeah. And I
Because
mean,
then, sorry, solicitors, when they, every time they see an ad, they respond to, and they're expecting to see to buy something, and then oops, it's not. The second time, oops, it's not, and then they give up, and basically you achieve your goal.
yeah, I mean, in a lot of spaces, we saw a lot of behavioral change very early on. It's a fine balance to, talk about, the possibility of this without, folks on the other side figuring it out and trying to change what they do. So, it's a interesting place to be at. A lot of folks are like, why isn't this more widespread? And part of it is, we're still testing different things. We have to still be careful. There is very real danger in many of these spaces. And it's kind of one of those things that if you put into play, no one can know that you're putting it into play. There has to be a certain amount of subterfuge on our part as well, because we are trying to stop things so far upstream. We're not, and it's hard to count, right? Like, so we don't have X amount of arrests at the end of it because we're trying to stop the buying altogether.
Like, where is it deployed? Like, do you
Oh, yes, yes. So
target sports events and sports, like, for example, the World Cup of football is coming in this city, and then the basketball championship in this city. Is this how you deploy it?
yes, we've actually deployed it in a few areas. During the Super Bowl, that is the biggest in the United States. That is the biggest athletic event where we see the largest rise in trafficking. We would like to continue to test this in other athletic areas. All the way from kind of those elite sports like F1 to basketball, NBA, All-Star Weekend. And it does take quite a lot of labor power to do this. because we are looking not just, it's not just about, can we disrupt, but it's also like, what are the levers of change? Like, where do we see kind of this behavioral change happening? We would love to, begin to partner with law enforcement, um, to see where this could be something that is run in the background all the time. I mean, this doesn't just have to be something that is run during athletic events, but it's certainly a good opportunity to be a starting point.
Absolutely. Could
Yeah.
you possibly, like, I'm thinking with you right now, I'm
Yeah.
brainstorming kind of with you. I'm assuming like you could probably like have an NGO or like a nonprofit organization and then receive a lot of funding so that you hire a lot of people to create more and more of these fake websites and then be out there so that you overwhelm the system basically, and then hopefully make a dent and stop that industry.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, and here's where we come, I think, full circle, with the AI piece is that, we aren't actually recreating the wheel. We're not actually out there creating fake websites or anything like that. But I think that as we begin to, get that algorithm, be able to hire, right, the right coders, the right data analysts, etc., have the right servers to do this, it could potentially be something that runs on its own and that is able. I think the promise is that it's able to change with the behaviors of the exploiters. I'll give you, it's not, again, always like a hard thing to give examples, but I'll give you an example. Very early on, the other side, as I call it, started to suspect that we had this bot running, on their websites. And so we saw that instead of listing phone numbers, they began to list alphanumeric strings. So instead of listing, 310, et cetera, they would list like a three cue ball emoji, spell out the number one, ONE, and then have the number one, in an effort to trick, whatever was getting the phone numbers and looking for these numbers. And that was, within hours. So, we are very well aware that, this other side is also observing, maintaining, looking at patterns. And has always been many, many steps ahead. And so, as social workers, as human service providers that are in this space where we want to use technology, we have to find a way to sprint ahead as well. And so that's the hope, is to find, that type of funding, to be able to do something, like this.
Absolutely. And I can
Yeah.
definitely see how AI can play a role. Like, AI is very smart, especially if you play around with GPT-4. It can understand even subliminal messages. It can even if you do these emojis things, it will still recognize the number. So if GPT-4, let's say, on the other side, it's probably going to be a great help and great aid for the efforts. I'm wondering, Joe, though. What is the percentage of sex trafficking in the US versus other countries?
It depends, the US has a really high percentage because we also have a very, um, we have a couple of things in terms of identification. So we have like quite a sophisticated way, I think, of identification. We also have an agreement, finally, across the United States that any child that is sexually exploited commercially should be considered trafficked. A lot of countries don't have that, or they have a very low age of consent. So our age of consent currently is 18. There's a lot of activists that are pushing for that age to be 24 in terms of, these types of exploitative crimes, just because, your brain isn't formed until you're 24. So, kind of tie it to some biology. In terms of looking at, really being able to identify both the like domestic trafficking and then also trafficking that occurs abroad. Again, that's why I have, kind of stayed away from numbers. I think the most important number is that it's a $99 billion industry.
Wow.
So, it is the folks on the other side that we talk about are loath to give up that profit. And I think that is the most like important number. There's such disagreement about the numbers that I think we get tied up into that. But I think what is most salient is that globally, sex trafficking is not the majority of trafficking, but it is the majority of profits. So the overall profits is like 150 billion, and $99 billion of that is made through sex
It
trafficking.
looks like it's like up there with the drug industry and all of that stuff. So
Oh yeah. It's like second only.
wow.
Yeah.
Dr. Annalisa, I want to thank you. It's been an honor having to talk to you and having this conversation with you. I'll leave you with the final question for the young folks that you probably teach, or the young folks who are looking into starting their college degree in social work or in something related to that field. What do you leave them with final words of advice?
I'm gonna leave them with the advice that my own advisor, gave me, that Dr. Agliani gave me, which is, we could be anything we want. I am very much a believer in the words of Arundhati Roy, which is another world is possible. And social work and social welfare have been the vehicle and the kind of academic backbone that has allowed me to do that. And I can't stress enough, especially in a world where we need more frontline workers than ever before, that this has been work that feeds my passions and also has really the impact to change the world. And I think that, as you said, it's lucky, but it's also a blessing to be able to be in that space where you can impact lives.
Dr. Enrile,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you so much, too, for having me on. I appreciate it.